Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing some turbulence. I'd appreciate it if you'd remain in your seats and keep your seat belts fastened until I turn off the fasten seatbelt sound. Thank you very much.
When 3-year-old Alan Kurdi and 5-year-old Gallup Kurdi's lifeless bodies washed up on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, the world wept oceans, like the countless refugees before them, whose last view in this world was the inside of their boats. Their death knocked the wind out of our sails. This speech is for every child with nowhere to call home. This speech is for Gallup and Alan. On a serene, sweltering Sunday in Syria, a young man is awoken by incessant tugging on his coarse, ripped shirt by his little brother. Such a deceptively gentle wake-up call, considering the reality he's waking up to. Instantly rolling over in his modest straw bed and roughly rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his first instinct, long before his eyes are able to see clearly, is to ensure that the room is secure. Just 18 years old, his sharp eyes tell the stories of a much older, much more world-weary man. Realizing that the room is safe, his eyes rest on his little brother's dancing eyes and happy smile, and for a while, the house is steeped in some peace. Boom! Instantly, he grabs the backpack by the side of his bed and scoops up his little brother, and in one swift motion, bursts onto the blazing streets. Slam! Forgetting how small the doorframe is, he hits his head on the door. Dazed, but with no time to hesitate, he staggers forward, turns on his heels, and sprints down the street, trying to determine the source of the confusion. Was it the doorframe he just slammed into, or the bomb that just incinerated it? It doesn't matter anymore. All that's left of his childhood home is a frame. The bomb made sure of that. Not sure where he's going or how he's going to get there, he keeps sprinting, his muscles and mind aching with the strain of carrying another person. All he knows is that they have to be anywhere but here. But when his neighbors are running with him, who is going to take him in? The ringing in his ears dies down to be replaced by his little brother's voice. Brother, where are we going? I want to go home. Too young to pose a threat, and therefore far too young to pose a threat to his older brother's resisting arm, they keep running together, against the little boy's will, into the unknown. They run from the bombs, the guns, the death, and the desolation, and they run from everything they've ever known and loved. The only remnants of their past, each other's company, and a faded photograph of their parents in their backpack. Considering I just made that story up, you might think that the refugee crisis and the tragic romance associated with it would be a good source of fiction. But it's not fiction, and it's not romantic. It's real, and it hurts. And variations of that story are happening to people around the world as we speak. Just as I would with a good piece of art, I went online and scoured the internet, looking for the most moving story to share with all of you. I didn't have to look past the first one because they're all equally heart-wrenching. I was so scared on the boat. I held my little brother in my arms when we fell into the water. I held my little brother and I cried. I prayed to God that I would go to paradise. I thought I was going to die. Farah, the girl that shared her story, like countless other refugees from around the world, was 10 years old when her and her little brother fell off a boat heading away from Syria. Her and her little brother fell off a boat trying to get away from almost certain death at home and faced almost certain death on the water. 10 years old, ladies and gentlemen, at an age when little girls should be praying for grades and games, Farah was praying that she goes to paradise after she drowns. I say with the most bitter regret that there are countless stories like this and countless crises all around the world, too many for me to cover in one talk. My hope is that I'm going to put my heart and soul into telling you about one, and then you go out there and learn about the rest and help for yourself. I'm going to be talking to you today about the Syrian refugee crisis. The Syrian civil war, which began in March, the Syrian civil war, arguably less romantic than the refugee crisis that it gave birth to, began on a fateful day in March of 2011, when a group of teenagers was arrested and tortured by the Syrian government for graffitiing on the walls of a school in Dara, Syria. What did they graffiti? الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, which translates to, the people want the fall of the regime. Their actions sparked a series of nationwide protests in which people took to the streets demanding the resignation of Bashar al-Assad, the incumbent ruler of Syria, who was holding an autocratic rule over all of their heads. What started off as a series of protests devolved into a violent proxy war, drawing in local and international powers who would stop at nothing to enforce their ruthless agendas on the people. The UN, there are three main powers at play within this war and three dimensions to the war. The first are the supporters of Bashar al-Assad, who also support the government, who have their own version of the slogan. الشعب يريد Bashar al-Assad. The people want Bashar al-Assad. The second power at play are the people that I imagine disagree with that slogan, the rebels, who want to overthrow the autocratic government and expel security forces that have taken over their localities, taken over their homes, taken over their schools. The third are terrorist organizations like the so-called Islamic State that have taken advantage of the unrest caused by the war to take over massive swaths of both Iraq and Syria. A UN commission of inquiry has determined that every party involved in this war has perpetrated war crimes, raping, pillaging, murdering, the indiscriminate use of war weapons, barrel bombs being dropped on rebel areas, killing countless numbers of civilians. Civilians suffering, cutting off supplies to civilians in order to weaken their enemies. And then, of course, we have the completely public amputations and executions carried out by the various terrorist organizations that hold a part in this entire war, who are seeking to propagate their reign of terror. The only people that are innocent in all of this, the Syrian civilians. They are fighting too, but their fight is the fight to survive. That is the only fight that they have ever partaken in. 250,000. Over 250,000 people have been killed in the course of the Syrian civil war. 13.5 million. The number of people currently in Syria that need our help, the vast majority of whom are refugees. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, for the people of Syria, it's not a choice anymore. For them, it remains a decision between staying at home and almost certainly getting killed or braving a precarious journey to a country that they don't know will accept them or not. All so that they have a fighting chance to survive. What would such a journey involve? 2 steps. Number 1 would be to actually survive traversing the land and sea to refugee camps. And number 2 would be to survive within the camps themselves with some level of dignity before they can finally, if they make it that far, integrate into a new society. So let's first talk about refugee migration. What are the risks involved within this journey? What makes it so precarious? It's important to understand what routes people take out of Syria at the moment. Most of them travel by foot, either through Turkey and then through Greece to Europe or to Egypt, where many of them, according to their own reports, say that the living conditions are worse than death. Go back overseas to Europe. I thought the best possible way to demonstrate both the precariousness of the journey and the sheer will of these people to survive would be to share a few stories with you. So first and foremost, let's talk about the stories of people that traveled by land. Let's talk about the story of Al-Hudhaifa, a man who returned to Syria to get an education, to get a job. But because of the fact that his parents were arrested 2 decades before he got there, the Syrian authorities bothered him. They harassed him. Nevertheless, he got his education and he got his job. But while he was prepping for the job interview, he went to buy a pair of shoes from Zara. On a whim, he decided he would not wear those pair of shoes until he was reunited with his mother in the UK. Over the next 2 years, the man protected those shoes with his life. He polished them, he kept them clean, because to him, they represented a dream. The dream of being reunited with his family. He protected those shoes with his own family. He protected those shoes through the death of his best friend, who was a humanitarian worker that was killed by security forces along with his brother and father. He protected those shoes. And 2 years later, when he landed in an airport in the UK, he put those shoes on in a bathroom and he went out and hugged his mother. That was the story of Al-Hutaifa. A very small proportion of refugees actually managed to make it over land in a plane. The majority of them, like in the case of Muhammad, walked from Turkey to Italy by foot. Maybe with Al-Hutaifa's shoes, his journey might have been easier. You never know. They rely on each other for support to make it through. Then, of course, we have the story of the men who made it across the border in a fuel reserve lorry truck. You've all been to petrol pumps. The actual petrol pumps at petrol pumps, what they did was swim in them for 24 hours to make it across the border. Then, of course, you have the story of the man who spent 2 months working for a smuggler, a people smuggler, just so he had a chance to make it across the border. He earned a place in a lorry with different kinds of liquids. When him and 7 other men got into the lorry, they realized they were in a lorry of melted chocolate. They were going to try and sneak into the UK in a lorry of liquid chocolate. The journey was supposed to be a half-hour long, and it was a chilly night, so at first it was quite comfortable for them to be in a little bit of warm liquid. But pretty soon, 2 of the biggest men there started to cry. So they realized that because this journey, because the authorities were holding it up, they would have to get out. It took 7 men at a time to pull each other out, all holding on by one hand. If that hand slipped, they would have all drowned in chocolate. What a way to die. Drowning in a lorry of chocolate, trying to sneak into the UK. The 7th man was nearly lost. They nearly couldn't get him out. His shoes are still in that lorry, in that chocolate lorry today. Imagine the chocolate factory owner opening it up and finding a pair of refugees' shoes within the truck. And then, of course, we have a moment on the land journeys, which to me epitomizes all that's good about people, especially in the refugee crisis. A standoff in Hungary between the police forces and the refugees, where a little boy offered his cookie to the police officer. His own cookie. Some might say the police officer was hungry, but not the right mood. It's moments like those, lighthearted moments, that give these refugees the hope to make it into these camps, to make it across those journeys. Then we have the other dimension, which is on sea. Here we have the story of Yusra and her sister Ismir, which is a story I really recommend you look up, because this is a story of a couple of girls who got into a boat, a load of people, trying to get away from Syria in August of 2014. They traveled on this motorboat for 30 minutes before it stalled. The boat threatened to capsize. What did Yusra, Ismir, and another lady who could swim do? They got into the water and swam the boatload of people to shore. Yusra, who's now a settled citizen of Germany, is one of 43 refugees who don't actually have an identity, who may be competing in the Rio Olympics in 2016 this year, as part of a special team that the Olympics has finally decided to allow, because they've identified that refugees are still people too. Yusra was told by her coach her level of organization is almost German, to which she vigorously shook her head and said, "That's how we do things back home in Syria." So let's say, by some miracle, you survive the journey to the refugee camps. What's it like in there? Suzanne Brooks, a journalist for the BBC, decided, you know what, I'm going to delve into one of these camps and see what it's like in there. What did she come out with? "I'm worried that this place will break their spirit. The cold and fear gets inside your bones." A doctor there said that routinely 2 people at least per week come to his clinic and complain that they're having pains in their heart. He checks them out, nothing. Emotional pain. emotional pain manifesting as physical pain in their hearts. The medical conditions there are so abhorrent that women that are forced into sexual slavery by their so-called protectors in return for rations are not able to get abortions after they get pregnant. There's no electricity, there's no running water, a lot of the time no running clean water, no space for people to sleep. And there are children being born in this environment. There are children growing up in this environment. How many people are living with this reality every single day? 10.8 million. The number of Syrian refugees that need our help. 6.5 million. The number of Syrian refugees that are internally displaced. 5. The number of countries that are housing 4.5 million refugees between them. If your country comes up in the next 5 countries, look at it with pride. Because these are 5 countries that are actually trying to make a difference to these people's lives. 2.5 million. Turkey, who are the global leaders at the moment in holding Syrian refugees. 1.1 million. Lebanon, which is 1/5 of its population. 650,000. Jordan, which comprises 1/10 of its population. 250,000. Iraq, which is excluding the 3.9 million of their own refugees that they have to deal with. 117,000. Egypt. 61%. The percent of the UN Humanitarian Fund in 2015 that the UN managed to receive to help refugees compared to how much it needed. 57%. The number of Syrian asylum applicants to just Germany and Serbia between April and July. April of 2011 and July of 2015. Take a second to let these numbers absorb. What's coming next is perhaps the most shocking number of all. 0. The number of resettlement places that many high-income countries, including Gulf countries, continue to offer refugees from around the world. One of the key considerations that governments around the world need to take into account is that the people in their own countries, the civilians in their own countries, don't even want the refugees there, don't even want to help these people that have no home and have no identity. What is at stake is nothing less than the survival and well-being of a generation of innocents. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a coalition of physical space. This isn't a coalition of resources. This isn't something we can't do because we can't accommodate these people. This is a coalition of minds and a coalition of hearts. It's about us wanting to help these people from the bottom of our hearts and the bottom of our souls. I need you, all of you, to go out today. And just as these people are shedding blood back home, shedding blood to help out refugees with everything they can, I need you to go out and I need you to spend. I need you to go out and help these people. And most importantly, I need you to go out and raise awareness. I need you to go out and tell people the plight of these refugees, because there is no getting around it. We can't have wool over our eyes anymore. These people are desperate. They have nothing. They need our help. Because at the end of the day, even though it wasn't our child that washed up on the shores of the Mediterranean, oh, how easily it could have been.